Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our board meeting, which this month is in Birmingham, in our office in Birmingham, which is great. Can I particularly welcome, first of all, Kirsty, who has joined us as Chief Operating Officer. Kirsty Shaw, extremely welcome. And then secondly, Mark Saxton, who's joined us as a non-executive director. So you're both extremely welcome. I don't think we have any apologies, so we can deal with that. Is there any declaration of interest that anybody needs to make? Which is excellent. We then have the minutes of the 21st February board meeting. Are they a true and accurate record of everything we discussed? Good. Thank you very much indeed. There's nothing on the action log that has not been completed, which is really good. Is there anything arising from the minutes that were not otherwise covered on the action log or otherwise on the agenda? Fantastic. And welcome to the members of the public who've just arrived. I'm sorry that for whatever reason you were probably held up somewhere, but you're very welcome. So, David, that takes us to the Chief Executive's report, please.
Thanks, Peter. So there's rather a lot in this. A significant proportion is for information only. So I'll do the performance material with colleagues, and then we'll pause during that, and then I'll take the rest at a gallop. So what you've got in the first paragraph and the annex is the performance summary for January, and you can see we're trying to present this in a crisper way. So you've got at the top of page 2 a brief summary of the performance that's on track. I'll not repeat them, and then more analysis of those where performance is under the KPIs, under what we would hope it to be, and there's an analysis there of the detail of the work that is taking place on report timeliness, safeguarding reports, and the inspection programme to date. I don't think there's anything new in those paragraphs. And then at paragraph 2, we've got financial performance, where the position is at the 31st of January is laid out, and an explanation of why that is the case. I suspect the questions that might arise are more driven by the performance annex, which has a much more detailed breakdown. This is a summary of the report you get on a quarterly basis, but as the key headlines. So if I pause there, Peter, and invite questions, and I'm sure my colleagues around the table will come in and answer specific ones which are coming in their direction. If it's around inspection directorates, and if there's anything about money, Kate will pick that up.
Right, so anybody want to raise anything? You might be on a winner here, David.
Okay, all right.
Carry on.
Never known before, but anyway.
Nearly, Lewis.
You did that so quickly, David. Are we now talking about the annex as well as the?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Questions?
Well, it's very helpful information, as always. Complex, condensed. I was struck by the. Maybe I've misunderstood, but the apparent rise in the number of whistleblower notifications to us. So, which is on, if I can find it. Yeah. So this is about volume received whistleblowing. So this is, although there's obviously quite a lot of month-on-month fluctuation, leading to an apparent peak in January. But I think the message of the slide is that there is a general, that despite the fluctuation, there is an overall trend towards an increased number of notifications. And I suppose that surprised me because of how much has been done to create across the NHS an alternative way of allowing people to speak up through the Guardian system. So a national infrastructure, if you like, a national message about the importance. And yet we're getting more more cases notified to us, or more people coming forward, let me put it that way. Do we understand why that might be?
So I don't know, if, with the NHS, Ted might want to come in, social care Andrea might want to come in. So these are all whistleblowing. This is right across the piece. I think what you'll find in this is a significant proportion of these relate to adult social care, not just to the NHS, whereas, to your point, the National Guardian role is specifically directed at the NHS acute hospitals. It's not yet offered in terms of general practice or in relation to adult social care. So some of the mechanisms you referred to, Lewis, are partial. They don't go across our full scope. But I think this was one of the issues that came out in the Public Accounts Committee hearing, which is how do we do, as we become more well known, as people understand who we are and what we do, and that's the survey work we do about prompted and unprompted recognition of us and who we are, and the more successful we become, then people feel more confident in referring issues to us. So I would offer that I think some of these figures are an artefact of that phenomena. But we continue to do work to understand this. I still worry about the accuracy of the figures in relation to are these all people who are employed that are raising concerns in relation to their employment and the quality and safety of their employment? Are they all whistleblowing cases which relate to quality and safety in relation to what's going on? So we continue to do work to actually understand the accuracy of the figures, and I think we do need to break them down. So I think what possibly behind your question, which is where are they from, what do they tell us, we can have a better understanding of whether this is more people expressing concern or whether this is more reporting coming through to us, and these figures are an artefact of that. I personally think this is more reporting coming through to us. But I think the truth be told, I wouldn't want to be definitive about what we think is going on here.
Ted, and then Robert.
Well, we're very much with those caveats about the figures that David was just highlighting. I should say that from the NHS perspective, I very much welcome this increase. I think it is a sign that people are willing to talk to us. And as I've said to this board before, the value we get from members of staff raising concerns in terms of identifying risk and helping us target our inspections where necessary is immense. And I think we owe a great deal of gratitude to the people who do raise concerns. And they give us really very valuable information. We are trying to change the culture of the NHS here. We're trying to create an open culture in which whistleblowing will no longer be necessary because there's so much transparency. We're a long way off that yet. And I think the work that the National Guardian's Office is doing and the work that we're doing is encouraging people to come forward. I think that's right and proper. And I think it's going to be quite a while before we see the improvements in culture driving down the numbers because people no longer feel the need to. I think we're way off that yet, Lewis.
Well, I was going to make firstly much the same point, which is that increasing numbers is probably a good thing rather than a bad thing. It's rather like complaints. The more complaints you have, the more learning you can have. The question, though, I would have is about the pie chart next to it, and I may have mentioned this before, but it is that I'm not sure we're digging down and getting information about exactly the point Ted has made, which is how useful the information is to us. So we are told here that a certain percentage has brought forward a review, and one on the whole would think that means that's a really useful piece of information. Then there's the majority, in terms of this pie chart, are noted for future reviews. And that's what goes out in the letters most of the time, which if I were a whistleblower that had summoned up the courage to say something I regarded as important, I would get a sense of anticlimax about that and worry about what that really meant. And I worry, as a board member, what it really means here. So, for instance, when the review eventually takes place, do we in any way have a measure of the extent to which the whistleblowing information was confirmed or not?
So on that, when we receive the information, it's categorised, and there's a priority categorisation where priority one is if there's a risk to health and safety, and that will get a pretty immediate response. And at the other end, priority four, for example, might relate to a breach of an environmental regulation where others have already been notified and they'll get a different. So we continue to apply that approach, and we're currently updating the guidance to all inspectors in relation to whistleblowing, which will again confirm some of the issues around what action needs to be taken. So I think this is something that receives a fair bit of attention at a senior level in terms of how can we be assured that we've got consistency at the front end, I think, which is behind both of your questions and pulling out the data. And the data does open up the need for us to be constantly on that. And just to use one of the phrases from the last session about being constantly curious about what is this telling us and what do we know. We've driven inspections. The one that immediately comes to my mind is the Mary Stopes International inspections, which were done in the 16 through to 17, which were driven by concerns from our inspections and by whistleblowers. But we also know my inbox, Robert, I know yours is as well, will frequently get people who've blown the whistle who feel that we've not listened to them adequately, we've not taken the appropriate action as quickly as we should do. And we actually need to listen to both of those. We need to listen to the challenges which come in, as well as actually building on the successes. We get very little coverage, media coverage, when we do an inspection and then take enforcement action based on a whistleblowing concern that comes through. The board is an opportunity to raise some of those issues. But we do get challenged quite properly if we're not seen to take action sufficiently. So I think the review of the data, making sure we've got clean data, the data's up to date, we can be absolutely clear about it, the issuing of guidance to inspectors, making sure we're not conflating safeguarding concerns with actual whistleblowing. The true legal definition of whistleblowing are all part of the data cleansing that's been going on. So I wouldn't want to come over as being in any way, shape defensive about what we're doing, but I'd also want to be clear to the board that we are constantly reviewing the approach. And I think just to pay tribute to the National Freedom to Speak Up Guardian, Henrietta Hughes, who I think has done a fabulous job in terms of setting up the National Guardian's Office. I think the quality of the work between inspectors and the National Guardian's Office about exchanging information to make sure we're picking up, I think was evident when Henrietta came to the board. She had her annual conference about 3 or 4 weeks ago where we were able to go through a number of these things. I was able to say a few words, but there was a whole day conference where we got inspectors really who were present, who were really looking at how we work with the National Guardian's Office in relation to their role and responsibilities. So I know that in terms of the inspections, it's something that Ted's team, when they're out in the hospitals, is a big component of the inspection methodology, because that's, let's face it, that's where a lot of the publicity around whistleblowing comes from, rather than in care homes, where the volume of our whistleblowing concerns come from that need to be attended to as well. And at one level, I worry considerably about the ones that come in from adult social care, because they are more closed institutions, without getting into the sociology of all of this. Because hospitals are pretty public places with lots and lots of people going in and out every day. I'm not sure care homes are necessarily as public with that degree of scrutiny. And as you were sharing with us about your personal experiences the other day. So, yeah, I'm going to start repeating myself. We're not complacent. Yeah. So,
Lewis, can I just bring Andrea in and then come back to you? Yes, Andrea.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to make a couple of points. The first is that this is really important information for us, and as Ted has said, I am personally, and I know that my team are very grateful to people who do step forward and share that information. I was going to say the same thing as David, which is that very often we are the people that they would want to turn to, because if you are working in a small care home, you are blowing the whistle on people who you may be living very close to, bumping into at the supermarket. There are very often small enclosed environments where it could be very difficult to raise your concerns within that environment, and therefore coming to us is very important. I do think, though, that it's not just about kind of immediately going out. We do indeed have experience of people raising concerns with us, and that has triggered a responsive, very quick inspection and going out and monitoring what's happening on the ground. But we are constantly monitoring these services. Every single adult social care location sits on the portfolio of an individual inspector. They are gathering information together on a regular basis. This is part of that building up the picture that helps us to ensure that we're scheduling inspections correctly, and that when we go out on inspection, we're asking the right questions and we're really focusing our attention in the right way. The final point is, and I welcome, as David has said, we're doing this additional guidance and support for inspectors to help them to do the right thing. And part of that is about the response that we make to the whistleblower. Sometimes we can't make a response to the whistleblower because it's anonymous to us, and therefore it's difficult for us to do that, and closing that loop can be difficult. But very often we do try to go back to people. But increasingly you will see in reports that the reason why we have undertaken the inspection is in response to concerns being raised with us. And I think that that's another way for us to demonstrate that we are valuing this information, that we're taking it seriously, and that we will do something about it.
Thanks. Lewis.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for all these comments. I think that's very, very helpful. And I think getting behind the data, I think, is key here. The difficult that is. I absolutely accept the idea that as with complaints, a rise can signal a change in the culture towards openness, and we'd want to welcome that. But I just want to caution against relying on that interpretation. There is a danger for us, without disputing it. I just want to caution against being too confident of it, because there is a danger that we fall into the sort of culture of positive news, which runs around national organisations at times, so, when the figures are going up, we'll think that's good, and when they start coming down, we'll think that's good as well. So we can't lose. Sometimes the figures are going up because, don't forget, when we're talking about whistleblowing figures, we're not simply talking about openness in the system. We're talking about failed openness locally. And so we can't be too happy that that's the situation, though we might welcome the fact that our role is then being sort of recognised and responded to. David, you're absolutely right that my concern is partly about social care, and care homes, and I'm not going to pursue my own sort of personal case in the board here, but just care homes are, as you say, a different environment. They are smaller. They are smaller in various ways, but they're smaller in terms of number of staff. They're local. The adverse news that a care home might generate has potentially an impact. Can have a commercial impact, and so the reluctance, I would suggest at times, for care homes to respond to legitimate concerns of staff, I think, is there is an incentive not to respond. And in my own case, the hounding and harassment of whistleblowers was quite evident, but concealed for quite a long time. So I think we just need to have an open mind about what these figures might mean, and make sure that we don't lose sight of the human sort of effort that goes into being a whistleblower, and the tremendous commitment that whistleblowers are making to the system, because they're often not making any commitment to themselves. It's very stressful for them, and the commitment they're making to the values of the system that we regulate when they do speak up locally and to us, and making sure that, Andrea, as you say, that we respond properly to them. I think responding to them direct whenever we possibly can, talking to them, understanding what they are really telling us, and making sure that they feel that they having taken this step has been listened to. That's incredibly important. So I think these answers have been very, very helpful. And but can we just continue to keep our eye on this very important issue?
So I think when I first came to CQC, one of the things that quite a lot of whistleblowers were writing to me about was not that we had failed to go back and say we received your concern, and it wasn't that in the main that they were unhappy when we were saying, and we will look at it when we next do the inspection. So it was what they were unhappy about was that they then never heard what had happened when we'd done the inspection. And I think we've discussed this in the board before. I think since then we've got much better in our inspection reports in closing the loop, saying we did have information about whatever, and this is what we found on the inspection. And I think it's really important we don't lose sight of that in our inspection reports, because that does close the loop for a lot of people, to get to your point. Good. Are we happy to oh, sorry, no, Paul, go on.
No, it was a different
Different point, right, Paul.
Right?
Different point, yes.
Could I just ask about report production and what we can expect in terms of when the improvement to the timeliness of report production, and I guess, Ted, this is particularly aimed at hospitals, but and others as well, because I've just pointed out that this is something which has been a problem for forever, it seems, that I don't think we've ever hit our targets on report production. That's been picked up by PAC and others, and NEO in that respect. And in the commentary that we've got within David's report, there's a bit which says, well, actually, we brought some analysis to the executive team in January, and we're going to do some more work, and we can expect something to come back to the executive team in the next few months. And that doesn't sort of feel to me like we're really getting a grip of it. And if you look at our business plan for next year, it has the same KPI, and unless we do something about it, the KPI is going to be missed by a mile again. So it's just a little bit of questioning about when are we going to see that improvement come through?
So Steve looks like he's going to answer the question. Steve.
Well, I can only speak.
No, it's actually Ted's bit, which is the most difficult.
Well,
Go on, Steve.
Report time is important for all of us, actually. The problem with the KPI is it's like a rolling sort of average, and we had a problem when we were coming to the end of the programme and trying to get through the volumes. If you look at the graph, which you see, our improvements really kicked in April of last year. We think that the KPI will be met in April or May of this year, because the backlog of long reports, some of the complex enforcement action, which meant some reports took many, many months, that has now passed. And if you look at the PMS graph, we're since May of last year 26 days, and we're now 31 days. And that's because we've introduced a lot of work looking at lean methodology, working on each step in the process, because we believe it's important. Unfortunately, the KPI is about 10 months behind where the actual action is.
Ted?
Yeah, I share your concern, Paul, and thanks for raising it. As Steve said, some of this is about dealing with backlogs of reports, and we have improved the processes. And if you look at the graph at the bottom on page 10 on the left-hand side, the average length of time producing reports is coming down, but it is still not achieving the KPI. And I think that is a reflection of the complexity of introducing the next phase inspection at the same time as clearing some of the backlog from independent healthcare inspections which have been taking place. A lot of work is going into managing the process of next phase inspections to make sure they are coming in on time. We are getting closer to it all the time, so I hope this is going to turn around quite radically soon. But there will be a bit of a backlog in independent healthcare which will keep the averages down. What you're seeing in the KPI on the right-hand side is the kind of long-term situation, which inevitably takes a long time to change because it is data over a very long period. And I think probably, and John mentioned this, I think, at the last board meeting, we probably do need to move to a way of monitoring this through, a timely process of a statistical process control rather than just the annual KPI, which I don't think is really very helpful in that we can't really turn that around in short order, so it's very difficult to demonstrate progress going forward. The work we're doing around quality improvement, I think, has to be the focus on getting this better. And it is very important we direct our quality improvement initiative starting out in these areas of difficult performance, and that's what we're determined to do.
So the risk of upsetting colleagues, I mean, I don't think, with great respect, in hospitals where they are large and complex, we will actually get to the turnaround time that I think is necessary, whatever the KPI is, while we are essentially a pen and pencil operation. The technology that we're working on will be the game changer, and that, in my view, when we get that in place, the report will come up much more quickly. The quality assurance around that will be much easier operation. So I think it is technology, and we aren't at that point yet, but others may disagree. Ted?
Just to come back on that, Peter, I mean, I totally agree with what you're saying there, but actually I think we can improve a lot on where we are at the moment before that technology comes in, and that's what we're doing at the moment.
Sorry, and I didn't mean to imply otherwise, but I just think there is a bit of change that you're making at the moment. The quantum leap comes with the technology, I think. David?
So just to, not to have the last word on that, but I've asked every year for the past 3 years, do we want to change this KPI? And we did it again for the business plan that you'll be invited to agree in a few minutes' time. And the executive team were consistent in their decision to keep the KPI where it was. So that becomes our public declaration of the target we should be working to. And the expectation, I think, is of the board and members of the public is that we should be working towards that. I was asked specifically at the Public Accounts Committee, because this was a big thing for them, when did I think, and the politic of this was all about the NHS, when did I think the NHS would begin to improve? And rather put on the spot, my answer was we'd expected to hit 50% during 18-19. So that's what we're on the record of saying within an agreed target of, I think to Steve's point about a rolling average, I think if you look at where Andrea and Steve are, they're going to hit that. What Steve's working his way through is a backlog because it's a rolling average that keeps that going. So I think we'll get there. And you're right, the challenge is going to come from a mixture of improved systems and productivity. We're going to start distributing laptops, which will go to inspectors, which will allow them to have a tablet that they can write on, which will then convert it into scripts. I think as we begin to mature that kind of technology, the productivity improvements will be considerable as it works its way through. I think Steve's point about end-to-end processes and constantly reviewing those end-to-end processes is right. I think some of Ted's team have proven they can do it. I think there's a mental health report and a big mental health trust that was done in 30 days. So it is possible to do this. We know it's possible to do this. The issue is about how can we work in a consistent way right across the organisation to do that. But you're right, Andrea and Ted are both going to have to work very, very hard with their teams over this next 12-month period. But I don't want to preempt the next discussion, Peter, but there was a very conscious decision taken to propose a business plan to the board which kept it at 90%. Okay, press on. Thanks for that. So the next... I've already in part referred to the Public Accounts Committee report, but this is the first public meeting of the board since the Public Accounts Committee published their report on the 9th of March of the hearing which took place last week, and they reflected on the progress that we'd made. They referred to substantial progress which built on what the Public Accounts Committee talked about, improved significantly. But they also focus quite heavily on the issue that you've just been discussing, which is report timeliness, amongst other things. And interestingly enough, Lewis, your question about whistleblowing, about what impact does greater recognition have if we get more work coming through in terms of how we plan the allocation of resources to make sure we've got sufficient people to do the job we're asking people to do as well. So it's interesting, Peter, how two of the conversations this morning reflected the conversation at the Public Accounts Committee.
Yeah.
Which proved the Public Accounts Committee are on the case. If I can do that. A slight irony that 5 months after my appearance, they published their report, and one of the issues they were challenging us on was publicity, so I can't resist the deliciousness of pointing that out in a public forum, so thank you very much for that. I promise I'll behave as I go towards July. But rather importantly, though, in the Public Accounts Committee report was the attention they brought to the value of the work that we do on local systems reviews, and this important issue about looking at the system as a whole, not just on individual systems. And I think that was from the perspective of wanting to encourage some longer-term solution about being able to look at the way that systems operate. So it's a helpful opportunity to both review our progress, Peter, and just to acknowledge that the report from the Public Accounts Committee itself. Interestingly, they want us to report back by virtue of a letter in April 19, which hopefully means that there won't be another NAO review with another Public Accounts Committee hearing. So I thought that was a significant step. We'll bring forward an integrated action plan which we'll bring to the board, which combines the National Audit Office's action plan and our response to the National Audit Office report as well as to the Public Accounts Committee report. And that will go to Paul's Audit and Corporate Governance Committee in April. Moving on, Competition and Markets Authority published their report in December 17. Hugely important report. I thought an excellent report as well in terms of its content and the quality of the research and the evidence that they brought forward, and they focused on capacity, consumer protection and consumer information. The government published on the 5th of March their response, which accepted the recommendations in principle and in full, and stated that a significant component of the government's response will be captured in the Green Paper. And I think this was talked about over dinner yesterday evening, but the Secretary of State yesterday made a speech on the 7 principles that would support a Green Paper in the summer. And I think you can see in that speech some of the principles that were flagged by the CMA in their report. So I think a pretty significant report from the CMA. Paragraph 5 is about the Kirkup review. This is a review that Dr. Bill Kirkup was asked to undertake in Liverpool Community Health NHS Trust. He published a report. It had a number of recommendations. We've accepted those recommendations where they were directed to us, and attached to this report is an annex which picks up on some of those recommendations. A significant one that relates to us was directed to the Department of Health, which was on the Fit and Proper Person review, where the Department of Health and Social Care said they would identify an independent person to carry out a review of both the scope, what do they cover, and operation, how are they being applied, Fit and Proper Person regulations. We're waiting an announcement of who will lead that review. In terms of the challenge to us from Bill Kirkup's report, he was clear that we failed to identify the extent and nature of the problems back in our pre-2013 recommendations. Rosa Cooper, who was the MP, championed these issues and contacted the local head of hospital inspection and also myself, and she's a pretty indomitable spirit, is Rosa Cooper, I have to say, and we undertook some responsive inspections where we picked up on some of the allegations around bullying. Interestingly, going back to the earlier conversation, the closed culture in the trust. And as a consequence of those, staff did disclose their concerns around the culture and the way that people were treated. We then took enforcement action, and a new leadership team was introduced with some people leaving. So whilst we didn't get underneath the skin of this organisation in those early inspections, we have subsequently, and of course since that first inspection we've changed the way we inspect, and it's a different and new methodology which is more rigorous. And as I say, the recommendations which are directed at us are set out in Annex 2 to this report today, so a very important piece of work. Paul, did anybody want to come back on that? No, keep going. Steady, Lewis.
Yeah, sorry, Dr. Ward. Well, just maybe to pick up. I mean, this is a very important piece of work, actually. It's a very important report, and the. It's had quite a high profile in the northwest, of course, maybe higher than it's had nationally. You're right, of course, it relates to a period a few years ago, just before actually the methodology was changed. So that always allows us to say something which is, I think, is genuinely true, which is that it is less likely that this would be missed now. I think we have to be able to reassure people that our new methodology would pick up some of the sort of flags and warning signs there. And in some ways, the interesting bit about the report is, of course, the meat of the report when you read about what actually happened and some of the things that we might be finding, and the requirement, therefore, on us to put together this string of things that was going wrong that could have been tied together at the time. So, for example, the fact that there was a new board, actually, that was one thing. New, and Bill Kirkup very specifically said there's a new and inexperienced board that provided insufficient challenge to the top of the organisation. So, in terms of our well-led inspections, there is a clear message about what we're there to. One of the things we're there to look for. The bullying, of course, which went unpunished and unreported largely. But other things like unrealistic cost-saving targets, that was a sign that this organisation was running into trouble. And I suppose because it made specific reference to prison health, I suppose because of my interest in that area, picked up on that. There was a suggestion that some of these areas which can sometimes be on the margins of an organisation, that they tend to suffer more, and that neglect of the peripheral specialty could also have been a sign. And so I think quite a few, behind the actual wording of the recommendations, which is very much in the style of reports, the actual detail of what they found and what the signs really were, I think it is a really helpful report for us, I would say.
I agree, Lewis. I think there's two people come out of it with immense credit. One is Rosa Cooper for championing the issue and she's done a job as an MP, and I have to say, and has invested in us and given us the confidence to be able to respond to what she raises. She doesn't always do it in the most comfortable of ways, but she's absolutely focused on the quality and safety of services. And as you know, she's raised the issue around prison health as well on the back of this. But I think Bill Kirkup's report should be compulsory reading for every inspector. I've actually said this because I think it's a fabulous analysis of what the issues are. And that combination of factors of an inexperienced board and inexperienced management team agreeing to unrealistic savings targets, which is what ended up driving quality into the background over this period, with all the consequences that come from that. And I think our challenge is to build that into the way that we inspect, and not into our systems and processes or key lines of inquiry, but in terms of the appreciation that inspectors have got when they turn up on a wet Tuesday in February at Trust X or a sunny day in July at Trust Y. How far are some of the risk factors which are flagged in Bill's report to the front of their minds when they're actually carrying out the inspections, doing the interviews, looking at the data. I think, again, it goes back to what weight we give to concerns which are raised by people, and I think we shouldn't be complacent. This was the old methodology, but we should be constantly saying to us, this could happen again. How do we ensure this isn't going to happen again, rather than we've changed the methodology, thank God for that. This is something we need to be constantly on to, and I think we have given this a profile by bringing it to the board in an open session in this way about publishing our action plan in relation to what Bill Kirkup has said in his report is just one way of doing that, and of course it is why there's a board of non-executive directors to ensure that we keep true to this, and so I think by combining those forces, hopefully we can actually do justice to the work that Rosa Cooper and Bill have done for us.
So Ted and then Robert.
I mean, this is a very important report for us because, as you say, it does describe how we failed to pick up these problems in our previous methodology, but it does, I think, stress the importance of keeping focus on leadership, culture in organisations, and that's something we've learnt over the last 4 years when we've been doing all these inspections, and I think the emphasis we put in our current methodology on well-led is absolutely a reflection of that. And I think the lesson for us is we need to focus very clearly on well-led and doing well-led really well to understand the culture in organisations that can lead to these kind of failures that were so bad in Liverpool. It is a deeply shocking report to read. I mean, our inspection reports, more recent inspection reports on this trust were shocking as well. And it is, I think, really very important for us to pick up, if you like, the leadership keys to this from our well-led that will point us towards real problems on the front line. And one of the things we've got to do, and I think it's really very important, is we don't focus just on what happens around board tables, but actually correlate that with what we're seeing in frontline clinical services, because I think that has been the real power of our inspections so far, and I think this is an important reminder to look at both aspects of the work in trusts.
I can't tell you how often after I did the Mid-Staffordshire report I was asked, was that was a one, in fact it was always a leading question, usually by people who should know better, that was a one-off. And I continually said, no, it wasn't, because look at the Kia review. This is another example from the same time of almost exactly the same pressures producing the same terrible result. And I agree that we should not be complacent because our methods have changed. These things are more likely to come to the fore. But I think one thing perhaps hasn't been mentioned. It's one thing for this to be a case study, as I really think it should be, if only because Bill Kirkup managed to put in 50 or 60 pages, what it took me three volumes. But then I did go first, didn't I? But the more serious point is that it's not just the inspection. A lot of the factors he mentioned here are still present in the system. Happily, one would like to think they're being managed better in most places. But actually, these factors mentioned in recommendation 2, plus the stories behind them, it seems to me, are very valuable indicators to what our intelligence should be looking at in terms of throwing up an assessment of risk.
Good. I think a useful discussion and some important stuff in there. David, let's
okay.
On to the next one.
So the next item is about something called care rooms. You've may have seen some publicity around this, and this report is an opportunity just to provide a clear public statement of how we're addressing the issue. This is a novel service, and a great deal of thought has been given by registration colleagues about what are the implications for CQC of this service being developed. It's effectively a service where people recuperating after a hospital stay go to stay. And the question has been raised is, should these services be regulated? But on the basis that these services are providing accommodation, they're not providing care, the decision has been taken, i.e. Carrying out a regulated activity, which is the basis, the legal basis for registration. At the minute our judgment is that they should not be registered, the provider has been quite open with CQC, and we have been open with him. And as you can see from this paragraph, we've been keeping that situation under review. And if those services do expand, or the service offer is changed, and there is the offer of a regulated activity as defined by the regulations, then registration would be considered. This is effectively about scope, and One Trust does have a contract with care rooms, and what we're saying in the second bullet point here is that we can actually use how we regulate the trust, and similarly look at how some local authorities may use care rooms, how local authorities can use their powers to look at care rooms, if that indeed is something that's required. But the important bit from this paragraph, Peter, is just to provide some clarity about what our current position is in relation to whether these services should be registered. As I say, there's been some press coverage saying that we should be registering these services, so this is an opportunity just to make public comment in relation to this. And again, we'll continue to monitor the situation and continue to have discussions with a provider who has made contact with us and wants, I think, to do the right thing in relation to this.
So, just to interrupt you, David, I think this is exactly the right approach. And while it is effectively a hotel operation, then there is nothing to register. But your point about monitoring carefully that there isn't sort of mission creep, that suddenly the service doesn't change into effectively being a care provider, and I think we will need to be very careful to make sure that the people that are registered that are using this service are very clear of what's happening, and we haven't got something different in a year's time, but it's still unregistered. So I think this is certainly something we need to watch. Yeah. Robert, sorry, yes.
I don't want to put anyone on the spot in terms of where these dividing lines are, and I absolutely endorse the idea that if what is happening is it's a room, then that's one thing. But if it goes further and some form of care or rehabilitation is being offered, would that trigger our interest? Yeah. And the other thing is, even if that's not happening, how do we ensure that the public are aware of the difference? Do you see what I mean? In the sense that somebody else might be providing, for instance, the care in that room, but it might look as though it's all under one envelope when in fact it isn't. And I just wonder whether we're in a position to cope with that, because all sorts of things can be happening but around an apparent provision of a room and nothing else, but in cooperation with other people it all becomes the same thing.
Yeah. And this is why this is an important and sensitive issue, which, hence it's at the board today. So if it did change. So I can't remember the number, Andrew, I don't know whether you can, but we've got a large number of supported living accommodations, which are effectively adult fostering schemes, where the care is provided, is defined by us as a regulated activity, the treatment of and support of people. And they will be registered. So that's somebody else's house that people live in, and they're supported to do that, and that will be deemed, as I say, supported living. And that's been a situation which has endured for coming up for a decade, I think, in that formal way. But it's why it's important that the registration team continue to work with the provider in relation to this. We don't think the provider has got an innovative approach. It is new, it is different, but I don't think the provider is trying to game the system in that sense. He wants to do the right thing. So I think that's important, and I think really does underscore, not undermine, the importance of, at that point we're having discussions with providers about registration, the importance of that conversation, that discussion going on, to make sure that we understand what the offer is and what the risks are. I think, to your point, I think if this is what you meant, Robert, my understanding rather than whether you've presented it, we think there is more going on than is being offered. I'm not saying in this case with care rooms. Then the registration team do a significant amount of work on referrals of what look to be unregistered providers, because if somebody is providing regulated activity and they're not registered with us, they're actually breaking the law. So that would be something that the registration team would investigate with a view to correcting it, i.e. they do become registered, or there's enforcement action that we can take, there's prosecution that we can take in relation if people continue to do that knowingly. So that's broadly where we are. I think what we need to do as we begin to understand what this particular provider is offering much more and what the service model is, particularly if the service model stays the same, is we need to use our website just to actually make sure that people who are thinking of applying to us to register can be clear up front. I joined Andrea in Birmingham. It was Birmingham, wasn't it? Last week for the registration conference, and I was fortunate enough to be able to spend a day. There was quite a lot of conversations as we went through the day looking at the various bits of looking at the way that we register any service that applies to us. But the table that I sat on and spent pretty much most of the morning with, they were focused on what our pre-contact offer is to people who are considering providing, so people can self-select, and I don't think we do enough to explain what people need to get in place. So we have a lot coming to our door for registration of people who aren't quite clear, and then the fallout rate is quite high of people that eventually go through to registration, particularly around domiciliary care. So something like I used to work for a domiciliary care agency, and I'm thinking of setting up my own business will be a frequent call. So there's be a single person who wants to do this, and I've given no thought to some of the detailed systems and processes you need to get in place to keep people safe. So that takes a lot of time. Peter's often referred to digital, and I think in the for those of you that were there last night, Andrea's slides on the Regulatory Governance Committee, there was a couple of those coloured boxes which had in the importance of developing a digital offer. For those of us that do tax returns or do our car tax, you can't go on to the next box and complete it unless you finish all the boxes. We haven't yet got a system for this, so we've got people that send in an application form. It's not complete, so we send it back, and this is all paper to go on to this issue. They then send it in again. It's still not right, so we send it back again. So to streamline this process so we don't have to do any of that is really what the objective is, and that's what people are working towards. So it would be a bit like tax returns, taxing your car, or any of the other things that we do, where it helps for people to get it right before they apply to us, but it also helps us in terms of our processes when they come through. So that's the aim that people are working to, and the first stage of that was to do the business process mapping to make sure we've got the cleanest and simplest system, and that's one of the ways we'll root out people who are applying in the wrong way and without the full information, and putting our information up front. So that's pretty much the approach that's being taken, but that's probably going to take a couple of years to get through all of that and get that through. Peter just sighed for the record.
I was sighing only because I was looking at the time and just how far behind we are on the timetable, but that was all.
I'll catch up. So the gender pay gap, we've already had something on this. I think this is good news. It doesn't mean that we haven't got issues that we need to address, but in terms of recruitment and retention, it's a big part of the offer. I want to draw the board's attention to we're collaborating with a mental health safety improvement programme. I'm also wanting to make the board aware that we're in discussions about joining the Defence Employer Recognition Scheme and the Armed Forces Covenant, largely on the back of the work that Steve and his team have done with the Armed Forces in relation to our inspection of Defence Military Services. Staff from CQC will be contributing to the 70th anniversary of the NHS, and I may add the 70th anniversary of the National Assistance Act. Paragraph 11 is just an opportunity to flag the work we did on recent adverse travel, where because of the severity of the weather, particularly in Newcastle, the Newcastle office was closed, and the consequences of that. There's two issues that we're looking at further. One is, what do we do when we close an office? And the other is, do our technology systems actually support more of us working remotely when people can't get into the offices? The key issue about closing the offices was safety. There were red weather warnings in the North East and the South West, which was risk to life and limb, so we took the decision to close the offices, and we'll further review that. And then paragraph 12 are reports that we've published, and a significant sequence of publications on mental health. And then lastly, reports which are due to be published, fees, the state of independent acute hospitals and end of programme report, and the last, I think, in the sequence of reports that we've been producing on mental health. That's the report, Peter. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you, David. Malta.
There's one small correction to be made. At the bottom of page 9 says that the State of Online Providers of Primary Care report has been published. That's actually due on Friday this week. So this was corrected, the writing of this last week, but the scheduling changed. So expect it rather than welcome it having been published.
Thank you. We will welcome the expectation. Thank you. Anything anybody wants to raise on David's report we haven't covered? Okay, let's move on to the business plan. We have, of course, looked at the business plan in its various earlier drafts, so this is not to give the impression that a quick sign-off is we're not very interested in all the work that's behind it. I don't know, Kate or Malta, who wants to start on this? Malta?
I'll briefly start. So I commend to you our business plan for 2018-19, which is the public commitment of what we're going to do over the year, and that is being used to hold us account with the Department of Health and Social Care, as well as Parliament, and sets out our performance indicators as well. This year sets out 9 priorities in particular that we're working towards, in particular including 2 investment priority areas for our digital development and our implementing a quality improvement culture internally for all of staff. The 2 things then I just wanted you to be aware, there's some final refinements before the final report is published on some of the delivery dates following the discussion today, which is underway. And then finally that the subcommittee of the board considered the risk tolerance statement and risks set out in the report, and made some changes to the tolerance of a risk, particularly in the developmental phases around digital services, as well as some of the exploratory analysis, but also being clear that that risk reduces as we make those systems and analysis operational on a wider scale. That's it. Kate, anything on the finance?
Just to say that at the end of 17-18 we will have achieved our original spending review target for the end of the spending review period of 217 million, which is 2 years ahead of target, but we have set our budget for next year at 223 million to allow us to invest and to bring costs down further and introduce efficiencies in future years. So that's all built into the budget and the business plan.
So just to clarify, that's 2 years ahead of target, not behind target.
Yes,
No, you said out of target. I just want everybody
yes.
to be clear. It's ahead of target.
Ahead of target.
Good. So as I say, this is not the first time the board has seen any of this, but is there anything anybody wants to raise? Excellent. So we can agree the business plan and budget as presented, and absolutely we've noted the work of the Audit and Corporate Governance Committee and looking at that. Thank you. Right, Lewis, I apologise I wasn't at the RGC last night. I was in London with our Intelligence Away Day, which was really interesting, but that and a couple of other things meant I didn't get back in time. So sorry. So tell me, what happened?
Well, this is a summary of what you missed, Peter. We had 2 topics for discussion mainly. One was about CQC's role as prosecutor as well as regulator, and how these 2 might fit together. I suppose it's fair to say that we had a very good presentation, very good discussion, but it is still work in progress, and so there will be further discussions about it at RGC. I suppose a lot of the discussion was about how we decide who to prosecute, or on what grounds we might prosecute, and that led to the need for, or leads to the need for consistency of decision making. So there are training and workforce questions there. And also, what are our priorities? Given the potential number of cases that might be prosecuted, how do we decide what the priorities might be? And so further work might be needed on that to decide how CQC should reflect its own strategic priorities in those decisions, but also, of course, public and patient priorities too. And there's a wider question here, which is how that part of our enforcement sort of capacity, our enforcement sort of armamentarium, how it fits in with the other things that we do, the civil enforcement and so on. So it's a very important subject, and it will come back. The second topic was a presentation of adult social care. So, as you know, we have a sort of rotation of presentations from different sectors within CQC. This was adult social care's turn, and we had a very full presentation about progress in adult social care. Andrew, if I can just select one or two of the things that you said. One important one was that 81% of adult social care providers are now rated good or outstanding. Is that right? 81%. And that on re-inspection, the general trend on re-inspection is requires improvement organisations to, for a number of them at least, to get higher ratings, to get good ratings. So there was a positive message about the direction of inspection ratings. But we also talked about the future for adult social care, and just to summarise the future, because it's a very important part of determining where we place our effort and energy in the future. And it's worth saying that the future can be looked at in different ways. One is to say, well, what is the sector concerned about? And I think the sector is concerned about money. But it might also be concerned about quality, but also the lack of an improvement infrastructure in the way that we have in the health service. But money is the dominant concern there. The concern for CQC itself and for the social care bit of CQC is perhaps more about, not more, but is equally about responding to concerns, how we identify where risks are in the system, how we respond to particular incidents, and then how we use our enforcement powers. So there's more about how we do our job well. And, of course, all that sits alongside the public concern, and the public concern is poor care. And so not only that, but how because of poor care in the system, how do members of the public make decisions about where a relative might live, the difficulty of those decisions, and how we might. The question is how we might support them. So it was a very good and wide-ranging discussion.
Great, thank you, Lewis. Is there any other business that anybody around the board wants to raise? So we have a couple of minutes. David, you were the only person who notified me of a question. Oh, you're getting one of those. Even I was going to say you can come here, but David, we probably answered quite a lot of your question, but maybe prompted some further questions. So, David.
Yeah, I'm David Hogarth. I'm the coordinator of a small befriending charity, which brings us into contact quite a lot with registerable care of all sorts. As you say, the question I asked was really asked by Sir Robert. It was about the pie chart, about whistleblowing, but and also well answered by Sir David and by Andrea. But I think the point you were making, I think, was how whistleblowers who are doing something very, very brave, usually, particularly in care homes, need perhaps a little more than just to be told something is being put on file. And that is a very good point. But the other thing is, I think that Andrea has very often said, when a case arises where CQC has said that some care home is good, and then there's some awful abuse is discovered by Panorama or something like that, Andrea very often says, well, there is just so much we can do, which I take to mean is there is just so much that inspecting can achieve, because, frankly, you are not there all the time, and these things usually happen when you're not there. And so there is a sort of gap in your knowledge about everything that you inspect. And it seems to me that whistleblowing is desperately important because that is the only way of filling up this gap. So I very much hope then that you will be looking hard at whistleblowing and how you can encourage whistleblowers more than perhaps is being done at the moment.
David, thank you. I would take a slightly different view on one aspect of what you said, and only one aspect, which is I don't think whistleblowing is the only thing that is available to us. I think it's really, really important. So I don't disagree with anything that you were really central to what you were saying. But I think there are lots of other things we need to do. Our strategy, as you know, is to be intelligence-led. There are cameras. I don't know why you never thought of that, mention it before. And there are lots of things. We need information. We want to be intelligence-led. It's at the heart of our strategy. Whistleblowing is just a part, a really important part, but it's just a part of what we need. But thank you for raising it. I think with that, and miraculous speeding up towards the end of David's report, I think that brings to an end the meeting. So we are only 6 minutes late, which isn't too bad. Thank you all very much indeed. And we started. And it is Kate's last meeting. Yes, I hadn't forgotten. It's written here. No. How could I forget? It's absolutely here. But thank you, just in case I had, but I hadn't. Kate, you have looked after our finances brilliantly well. The fact that you've delivered our target. I mean, they may have had a bit of help from some other people in doing this, but on your watch, we've hit our target 2 years early, which is fantastic. And all I can say is that the MOD's gain is absolutely our loss. So very best of luck to you in the future, and thank you very much for all you've done for CQC in the past. And with that, as a board, we start again at 1 o'clock. So thank you very much indeed.